One word that's come up as we've talked about, especially you making up that word that had history in it.
Historicity.
That word
Look
you
it
made
up.
up,
It's a
that
real word.
neologism. I had this thought of reframing. And I've had this thought for a while as we've been talking. And I had it yesterday talking to James Ochoa because he had this whole
Phails at philosophy
resource or this process around mining the gemstones of your past, which was essentially reframing your experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Because that history, it matters how you view it.
Mm-hmm.
It matters how you frame it. It matters the stories you tell yourself about yourself are going to impact the way you move into your next self.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'll give you an example of this that's not personal, but is academic, right? And it's about understanding American religious history. There's a volume that was edited that I read early in my graduate training as a scholar of religion called Rethinking American Religion. It was edited by Thomas Tweed. And it's kind of like this. It's a series of essays by a bunch of different scholars who say we've told the story of American history as the Pilgrims coming and religion spreading west. What if we tell other stories? What happens if we reframe this on a fundamental level? So there's an essay that says, what if we think about American religion from the perspective of the way the West Coast is settled religiously and how that spreads east? What if we look at it as coming from the border with Mexico and spread? And religion and American religious history looks fundamentally different with each of those reframings, right? And there's a number of different experiments that are just kind of like rethinking how we tell this story.
Yeah.
This big story about who we are.
Yeah, as a people.
And then that is so potent. And I'm trying to think of the volume I read recently that was basically just looking at American history from the perspective of marginalized groups, right? Like where you center the history.
Yeah, I think
it's not like including the history, but making that the center.
Right.
And it's not that that's the real story and this isn't. It's that this is the stories that's been told. So if we tell this story, we have a very different view.
Let's balance it out.
Right. And the fundamental difference, of course, in that marginalized group retelling is to tell that story for real. You have to tell the story of marginalization, not from the perspective of what was done to a marginalized people, but what they did with the situation they're in. So it restores agency, right?
Yeah.
To the story.
Like you could tell the story of Christianity from the perspective of the Native Americans or the First Nation.
Another great book recently that's a reframing book I had was Indigenous Continent. And he's a historian of Native American history. And it's like, instead of centering the history of America on us, it's telling the history of America up to, I think, like the 19th century, where the center of the narrative is the experience of indigenous peoples. And what you see more than anything else, especially with the Iroquois League, which was an imperial power that existed for hundreds of years and was a major political rival to the early colonies, right? And we don't tell the story that way. We tell it as if it's just this sort of like weak. And there's almost this subtext of like, well, of course they lost because they were primitive, they were weak, etc. But when you recenter it, it's like, no, this was a complex, well-developed civilization that had this invasive force on its coast.
Yeah. And it's just like the diseases and sicknesses they brought with them.
Right. And there's a whole bunch of, and by all accounts, if you read that book, it looks like history should have lent itself to the Iroquois League. Like they were in the position of power for so long. And it's just a number of contingencies, right?
Yeah.
A number of things that are not about these two groups, but about the situations around them that ultimately result in the collapse of that civilization in the face of the advance of the colonies, right? That in yeah, that
should
there's a very different story. I think that's the important
well
thing.
look,
Yeah,
we have a system where history is told by the winner.
right. And in the end, and it doesn't have to be that way. That's just
No,
how
it doesn't have to be that way.
we
That's just the way it's been.
Right.
And that's because we as a people want to be winners.
Right.
And so we want to tell the stories of the successes.
Right. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about that kind of victim space.
Yeah.
When I read Indigenous Continent, it was very clear that part of what he was sorting out was like, yeah, there's real victimization that happens. There's that's not what this is about. But that if we try to tell the story of Indigenous America as we've even told it as a kind of apologetic that's criticizing Western expansionism, it's still a story that is primarily a story about victimization, and it robs that entire set of people of agency.
Mm-hmm.
And instead telling it about the story as a set of very powerful agents who build political systems, right?
And made
political
choices.
systems that deeply shape our democratic system, right? You know, the Iroquois League is a major influence on our Constitution.
Really? I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, our founding fathers are looking for resources, and yeah, they're going to ancient Greece, but they're also going to what they're learning about this major political power that they're doing business with. So, and we erase that when we try to inscribe it as just a story of victimhood.
Yeah.
So that reframing is important. Sorry to go on a big tangent.
Yeah, no. Reframing, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
I've learned that as I've gotten older. Where did I get that? I think I got it when I was doing neuro-linguistic programming.
Yeah.
Which is, it's got a lot of different views on it, and it's gone through a lot of wheels, turning of the wheels to go back to Buddhism. And I entered into neuro-linguistic programming during a turn of the wheel where it was really focused on psychology, psychotherapy. And so all the things I learned were about Virginia Satir and Milton H. Erickson and Fritz Perl, which are the three people that they modeled NLP on. And I think it was Virginia Satir who talked a lot about reframing and the power it had to really change one's life. Because